Zombie fans? Oh, alright, Walking Dead people. Okay,
Werewolf.
What's that?
Devil.
The Devil El Diablo. The werewolf, the lycanthropes. Are you going to see that new Underworld movie?
Sure.
There's werewolves in it, I hear. Yeah, like a twist on the whole theme. Okay, so now what I want to know is what's your least favorite scary thing at Halloween, Joe?
Ghost.
Ghosts. Okay, not a ghost fan. So we got ghost fans, not a ghost fan. Ghosts, okay.
I don't like that bats are made out to be scary.
That's kind of rude, isn't it? Maybe mosquitoes and like, you know.
Well, if you're a bug, a bat is really scary.
Okay. Nice pluralism there.
Pictures like the little kids carrying assault rifle.
Oh, that's pretty scary. Yeah. Okay.
People get the opportunity to be genuine creeps.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So these are all pretty scary, I will admit. One of my least favorite scary things, not to do with Halloween, but it's a scary thing that I think is very present right now in our world, is, what is it? I had it just a minute ago. Oh, yes, the lack of nuanced and civilized disagreement. I hope there isn't any of that in here. Does that threaten any of the rest of you? Yeah, I heard a few peeps out there when I said it. You don't even want to invoke their name. It's like Voldemort. I mean, the Dark Lord. Yes, that's right. But we must today name this scary thing, the lack of nuanced and civilized disagreement. Have you noticed that, or is that just me? That costume is really popular right now. Oh, God, what are you? Well,
That's the one with the orange mask and then the thatch on top.
I can't even say. But I know it's frightening. One of the most transformative things that I would ever taught in my long career as a guy who goes around and tries to get taught things was from a Sufi master. And I may have told this story here before, but my partner, Maria, got really into this particular Sufi master because he teaches through music. Right? You know, this is their main form of practice. It's like devotional song. And then your insight, kind of like what Dave's song expressed, the spiritual insight that you get is sort of self-sourced. It's not so much that somebody stands there and is like, well, you know, do this and do that. And you all sing together and hold hands, and then you come up with it on your own. And so I think that's pretty cool. And she thought it was pretty cool. So we started going and hanging out. And at one point, we got to chat with this guy who's, you know, he's a grandpa, and so he's got kind of this grandpaternal energy. And so, you know, Mario was inspired to ask, like, well, what's the wisdom you can give us for our relationship? Because he and his partner have been together for a really long time. And he said, okay, the most important thing to do in a relationship is learn to fight well. Learn to fight well. And so that, to me, it's very up in the learning to fight well. So what does this have to do with being a heretic? Learning to fight well. What does this have to do with being a heretic? Right? Because that's the title of the service, is something about being a heretic. Well, when I look around the world, I see there are a lot of people fighting. Right? Some literally with hands or weapons, some verbally. But what I don't see a lot, maybe this is just my cognitive bias, or maybe I'm not like in the right academic setting or something, but I don't see a lot of people fighting well, like fighting for their values with a sense of respect for the values of others. And I think if we learn how to be a heretic well, this is a lesson that we'll be learning, is how to have disagreements that don't cause us to demean or disown the people or groups that we're disagreeing with. I think in our fellowship, we have the capacity to fight well. I'm not supposed to tell you at this point. Apparently there was like a unanimous, is that right? Somebody told me it was a unanimous decision at our vote last week. And so that, to me, I'm like, well, that's cool. You know, there are other votes in the world that are taking place that probably won't have much unanimity, but at least for us, like, there was some so that's not fighting well. People just, you know, talked it out and then agreed. But I think we also, one of the things that this fellowship and the UUs in general have a capacity to do is to take multiple different viewpoints and welcome them all to the same table. Maybe if there's one tenet of that faith, that's what that tenet is that we can agree to disagree and hold each other in high regard while we do it. So, what this has to do with being a heretic, we'll get to in just one more minute. When I wrote the title for this service, as most things, they sort of just pop into my head. That'd be cool. How to be a UU heretic? That sounds kind of flashy, kind of edgy. And then over the last couple of weeks, I was thinking about this, and I realized that there are multiple ways that you can interpret that title. How to be a UU heretic? So the one that I posted in the description of this service was that we can know what the tenets of a faith are by understanding what you have to do to get kicked out. Right? You know, how do you know you're a Catholic? Well, you don't follow the Nicene Creed, you get kicked out. At least in the old days, I'm not sure how it goes now, right? So what is that for Unitarian Universalists? How is it? If you wanted a UU excommunication, how would one go about acquiring such a thing? Which actually, you know, for a UU, that might be a badge of courage or something. I'm so liberal, I got excommunicated from the UUs. Oh, man. I'm so counterculture. I went to that fellowship hour and they wouldn't even listen to what I said. But I also thought that the title of the sermon could be interpreted as, if you wanted to be a UU who was a heretic, how you could do that well. So not a heretic to UUism, but a UU heretic. So there are a couple of different ways that we can think about this UU and heresy. And so that's the inspiration for this sermon. Today I want to talk to you about three kinds of heresy. So there's a usage of the word heresy and heretical and heretic that comes from the ancient Greek culture, which is a little bit different than what we may be used to. There's the usage throughout the Christian dominance period of Europe, particularly the Dark Ages, and then the extreme and ultimate heresy, which I'll keep a secret until the end. That's where the real juice is. So let's start with the Greeks. This is from etymology.com. Heresy is defined as a doctrine or opinion at variance with established standards. Or, as Johnson defines it, an opinion of private men, I suppose what it could also be included in the modern age, different from that of the Catholic and Orthodox Church. So this is a definition from back in 1200. It comes from the Old French, and then from the Latin, which means school of thought or philosophical sect. So we start to see these, you know, between the 1200s and then the early Latin period, the definitions are actually quite different. One is that you're at odds or you're at variance with the established school of thought. The other is that you are a school of thought. This is a real interesting contemplation for me. And coming from the Greek, so even a little bit older, taking or choosing for oneself, a choice, a means of taking, a deliberate, planned purpose, philosophical sect or school. So the thing that I found out in researching is that in the ancient Greek traditions, heresy was used to refer to a time in a person's life, particularly in a young man's life, when they were testing out different philosophical schools to find values that would inform their life. Right? So if you went back to the Dark Ages and you called Dave a heretic, you know, that would be a terrible, terrible thing, right? And might get him or you in a lot of trouble. But if you went back to ancient Greece and you called Dave a heretic, everybody would go like, well, good, I hope you find some meaning in your search. Keep on searching, my brother. Yeah, and you're still a heretic, are you? So this is a very interesting thing. And I didn't realize that there were UUs who had already done a bunch of writing on embracing this term heresy. If you look up the page on the UUA website in regards to the 7 principles, the whole first paragraph is about heretics. It's either 7 principles or their history, right? The history of Unitarian Universalism. So that, oh, well, okay, at least I'm in alignment while I'm reinventing the wheel. So this is an outsider, or a person who goes their own way, or someone who's just generally seeking meaning for their own life from various philosophical schools. When we start to get into the later work of the church, if you don't remember, how the Catholic Church became the main dominant entity is that they gathered political power, mostly through uniting with the government of Rome, and then squashed the other Christian sects. And this all culminated in this thing called the Council of Nicaea, where they determined which texts were authoritative and which texts were unauthoritative. And this is not by any means to diss the early Catholic Church, but we should know the history that the way these other schools were disbanded was largely by the sword, and probably the trebuchet and the catapult and the bow and various weapons of war. This is how one philosophical school within Christianity rose to power. So it's a very interesting thing. And at this time, you begin to see polemics. Yes, you begin to see polemics in the writings of the early Christian authors that use the term heresy as a spear against other schools that disagree with the established doctrine. For example, one in Unitarian history is the doctrine of the Trinity. This was very important to the establishment of Catholicism, and not all early Christians believed in that. You can see nowadays, you can look up, I think there's a new title, but for a while it was called Jews for Jesus. And this is what some people might call a Christian school of thought, but it's aligned with Judaism, and they don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, but rather was the Messiah, was this prophesied leader. And back in the olden times, that would have been one of the schools of Christianity. So you can hear another little piece I got from the internet. The Greek word was used by church writers in reference to various sects, schools, etc. in the New Testament, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and even Christians as sects of Judaism. So in early Christianity, it was very important to make sure you know that you're not allowed to be Jews if you're going to be Christian. Hence the meaning unorthodox religious sect or doctrine, in the Latin words used by Christian writers, etc. So there are early church fathers, such as Tertullian, who implied that it was the Jews who most inspired heresy in Christianity. Quoting him, "From the Jew, the heretic has accepted guidance in this discussion that Jesus was not the Christ." St. Peter of Antioch also referred to Christians that refused to venerate religious images as having Jewish minds. So it's a very interesting early use and rebranding, right? This is our modern technological understanding. They rebranded the term heresy to, well, you can accept the doctrine, or you might be one of those Jewish-leaning heretics. And it's this very, and you get this all the way up to the same words that people like Hitler were using. You don't want to be one of those Christ killers. You don't want to be someone who moves away from the established Orthodox creed. And so we see this all throughout, especially the Dark Ages. Why are they dark? We can trace historically, it's because free thinking was not allowed. Free thinking was squashed. So you get the majority of the populace illiterate, and the few literate people are only allowed to copy specific authorized pieces of knowledge. Everything else is a heresy. Bummer. Scary, right? This is a good Halloween sermon. Okay, and so don't, if you see who you're going to call heresy busters, or we gotta find some way to keep this from happening. So a couple of famous heretics. One you may have heard of, Galileo Galilei. Do you know what his heresy was? Anybody remember? What was his heresy, Allison?
He said that the Earth revolved around the sun as opposed to everything else revolving around the Earth.
Yeah, rather than the Earth being the center of the universe, the sun was, in his day, the center of the universe, and everything else revolved around it. So he later recanted his heretical views so that he would not, I don't remember if it was beheading or burning. So he escaped that, but he was deemed so dangerous even after his recanting that he was put on house arrest, I think, for the rest of his life. So, the power of heresy. Fortunately, his teachings leaked out. The esoteric, occult teachings of Galileo leaked out and transformed our world. There are some other famous heretics, like the early Unitarians. Early Unitarians are famous heretics. So drawing on the first part of our lecture, something about the Trinity and something. Why do you think Unitarians might have been heretics? Yes, Sharon.
When I went to Romania to see the roots of the Unitarian, the original Unitarians, not the Americans, I saw the pit where they put Francis David, the 1500 down there, because he was a heretic.
Yeah. So what was the heretical doctrine?
It didn't accept the Trinity.
Yeah. So they thought that God was a unity and not a trinity, hence the term Unitarian. The Universalists also have early roots in a group called the Anabaptists, who got some bad press. I think they also may have, I remember, and I can't remember if it was like Christian propaganda that turned me against the Anabaptists, or if they had a weird cult leader in their history. You know, many religions have weird cult leaders in their history. I'll mention Buddhist. But these Anabaptists who felt that God wasn't here to mete out punishment because of your original sin were severely persecuted because of this heresy, that they thought maybe God wasn't a mean guy who created you with the seed of original sin, knowing full well everything that would happen and could make the universe in any way he chose, and he made you to burn forever. They were like, but wasn't there a verse that said God is love? How do you quite square those things? And people didn't like that quite so much. We have a great quote from the Confession of the Faith against the Anabaptists. They condemn the Anabaptists who think there will be an end to the punishments of condemned men and devils. So it's not even that they were Universalists who sometimes thought that everybody after they died, were sort of given a get out of jail free card. I'm kind of oversimplifying that, but there was a little bit of this look, there's no punishment coming after. Quit stressing out and be good now, okay? But they did believe that perhaps, just perhaps, when you're whatever the Christian version of karma ran out, then the eternal torment would stop. That maybe it wasn't eternal. That's even in the Greek. The word is eon, which we translate as eternal, but really means a long, long time. So that's interesting. And then we have Francis David, or David. We'll have to get a Transylvanian interpreter in here to tell us, who was the court priest to the first Unitarian king in Transylvania. So a lot of Unitarianism traces its roots to Transylvania because this person first converted, I think it was from Catholicism to Lutheranism, and then from Lutheranism to Calvinism, and then he slowly climbed this ladder, or if you were one of the Catholics of the day, slowly climbed the stairs downward toward Unitarianism. And, as we know, persecution then ensued. And then one more famous person, Michael Servetus, I don't know how to say his name, was an early Unitarian thinker who was burned at the stake for teaching against the doctrine of the Trinity. So this is the history of heresy. And if you didn't come because it had heretic in the title, and that was just, I can't speak to you then about what I really meant. But this is maybe where we are influenced from, where the connotations of the word heresy come from, is that we've been drilled in that heresy means you're probably a bad person. And we still use this as a barb. Have you heard this in scientific literature or in the biographies of scientists? I heard it against this woman, Candace Pert, I believe, who I'm not really sure what the scientific consensus is on her work, but in an biographical book she wrote, she talks about how one of the things that she had to go against was that research of hers that was later proven was held back and underfunded and pushed against so long, mostly because it was called scientific heresy. This goes against the established philosophy, therefore, it can't possibly be worth looking at. So we're still, perhaps it's something in our human nature that we want to look for. I mean, isn't it a little bit comforting? Well, no, I gave a sermon last week and we established that it's not comforting to have something that you can sort of cleave onto. But I think it's in human nature that if I were to stand up here and authoritatively say that I knew exactly how to save your souls or your country, that, maybe none of you, but some of us in the world, maybe 50% of America's population, might say that 48, 46?
40, I think it's 46 right now.
Okay, just after 45? I don't know. I'm not looking at any polls or anything like that. But I might be able to say, and this is not giving you my opinion, this is sort of just like looking at things. I might be able to make claims and not tell you any of the how, but to say them authoritatively. And part of our spirit says, oh, well, that sounds very authoritative, doesn't it? And it's kind of nice to have an orthodox view. And then there are heretical views, because we can conveniently not have to think about heretical views. In perceptual theory, we call this confirmation bias. So in our own minds, we have an orthodoxy and a heresy. We are more likely to see the things, literally see them, like in the newspaper. Our eyes will glance over things that don't agree with our confirmation biases and not register them at all, because we're programmed that they are not important, that they don't exist. Whoa, totally weird. More on that later. So, in the description for the talk, like I said, I wanted to explore how we could know what it is that UUs believe and practice by thinking about how it was that you would get kicked out. And I'm still in an exploration for this, but I started kind of meditating on this because it's hard to find. Has anybody ever heard of someone getting excommunicated from Unitarian Universalism? You haven't?
Well, not excommunicated, but there was a thing in the New World magazine about sexual predators.
Oh.
Whether they would be allowed when they had gone through therapy to join a congregation.
Yeah.
And a lot of UUs were saying, no, I'm sorry that you blew it. That's it. You can't be around our community.
Yeah, so for some UUs, that would be a bar.
Yeah.
For other UUs, though, because we have this congregational autonomy, that isn't a bar.
Right.
And they would work in different ways. And it's kind of a cool thing that in those cases, the whole congregation would come together and decide for themselves. So it's actually very hard, even that's a great example, because it's very hard to find one, for something that has so much unique in its title, it's very hard to find one unified creed that you can say, this is it. I think I mentioned this before, but in working with our RE committee for our youth education, people had brought up, like, well, should we do a little more specifically Unitarian Universalist themes so that our kids know what our Unitarian Universalist values are? So, that seems really very reasonable. So I got a great book that the UUA recommended, teaching our kids Unitarian Universalist. And it had a whole chapter on, we really need to let kids know they have an identity as Unitarian Universalists. We need to talk about what our beliefs are. And that's where the chapter stopped. It was very strange, and I'm not saying this disrespectfully at all, but it was such a weird, because I was reading this hungrily, and they're saying, and we can't just say, oh, we believe whatever your heart believes, and we have to let them know what we do believe. And I was like, yeah. No. So I decided in this continuing search, I decided that I would look first to our principles. And it's a wonderful thing So back to the Sufis for a moment. Once upon a time, I studied this school of Sufi philosophy that came down from a teacher called Hazrat Inayat Khan. And he had this wonderful thing that he set up his Sufi philosophy, how to know if the Sufi order is right for you, or how to join, or how to be a member in good faith. And they were called the 10 Sufi thoughts. And he was very specific. He wrote, or one of his students later wrote this piece that said, isn't it interesting that he didn't say the 10 Sufi beliefs? He didn't say the 10 Sufi creeds. He didn't say the 10 Sufi tenets of communication versus excommunication, the non-heretical. He said the 10 Sufi thoughts, with the notion that you were supposed to think about if you believed, like in this case, I think one of them was that all the different religions of the world were pointing towards similar universal truths. And that was meant to be a contemplation, not necessarily a recitation. So I was really inspired as I wrote this service that we have our 7 Unitarian principles, right? And to me, what it brought up, I had this image of kind of like, someone once told me to clean the counters before you sweep the floor. Has anyone learned this principle? Right? So you don't get kicked out of the house if you clean the floor before the counters. You just have to sweep the floor again. Or maybe you get your allowance withheld or something like that. Because it's a principle, right? And if you understand the principle, it's because the stuff from the counters is going to fall on the floor. And so if you sweep it up afterward, you get all the stuff instead of having to redo your work twice. I think the Unitarian Universalist principles are very much like this. The inherent worth and dignity of every person. You don't have to go out here and perfectly look in everyone's eyes in a coffee hour.